name is Mustafa. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota Medical School, and I am today here with my colleague and friend, neuropsychologist, Dr. Rick Hoffman. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, Mustafa.
So we're talking about Khat, and Khat is a widely used plant. It's widely used in East Africa and in the Arabian Peninsula. It's also used in other countries in Europe, North America, Australia, and other places, primarily among immigrant communities. We know that Khat has widespread effects on health, but today we are going to focus our discussion particularly on Khat effects on brain functions. So, Rick, why don't you go ahead and start us off on the topic?
Well, we know from behavioral observations there are clear and significant psychopharmacological effects with Khat use that resemble a mild case of amphetamine use. And generally, what's seen in a Khat use session is an early elevation of mood, as well as increased talkativeness. And that's typically followed later by sleep disturbance, a decline in mood, and often in insomnia.
This has indeed been observed from early anthropological studies that were conducted with indigenous populations who are using Khat. And a lot of these researchers early on were sitting with people who were using Khat and observing how they were doing it, looking at the time and the pace and the manner by which people were using it. It was for us, and in the field of health and neuroscience and behavioral research, around the turn of this century, when we were looking for what was going on in that, what has been studied on the topic of Khat and Khat use, and that was the reason why you, me, and others embarked on searching the literature, looking for any scientific work that's been done on the topic, and that's how we came to develop that review paper.
Yeah, that initial review paper, which is now a little over a decade old, was published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology. And when we wrote that initial review, we looked at the available literature and noted there were several animal model studies that documented behavioral effects of Khat on rodent behavior. But the human subjects research was pretty scant, and much of that was primarily reporting secondary observations. There were several papers examining psychiatric effects of Khat consumption. But at that time, there hadn't been any papers published that examined neuropsychological effects of Khat consumption. So in that 2010 paper, we reviewed the relevant research that had been reported on the behavioral effects on humans of amphetamines and methamphetamine stimulants. And at that point, proposed an agenda for Khat research in the area of neurocognitive effects of human consumption use of Khat, based upon what we knew about the effects of amphetamines and methamphetamines on humans. The research framework we proposed at that time was to examine the neuropsychological domains of learning, episodic memory, working memory, set shifting and cognitive inhibition, cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, strategic planning, and decision-making abilities. We also suggested that subsequent studies might also prove fruitful that examined attention and psychomotor speed, sustained attention, visual spatial construction, verbal fluency, and nonverbal fluency. A rather ambitious slate of studies to be undertaken, but we wanted to try to compare the effects of Khat with the effects of other stimulants.
And I'm happy to say, actually, that paper stimulated multiple projects already, at least over the last decade. So I'm also pleased with with the work that our colleagues and the team within the KRP program, the Khat Research Program, has done in multiple countries. And I was happy to have you help us and co-lead, especially the element on the neurocognitive functions and the neurocognitive part of that program. And actually, it has focused a lot of work on moving beyond just doing correlational or survey studies to looking at behavioral and neuro psychological functions and looking at the impact of this substance, this plant on these functions. I should note here that tobacco is widely used during khat chewing sessions. So things like cigarettes and water pipe are widely consumed by khat users during those sessions. The paper you had published in addiction was an excellent example for examining the impact of this khat tobacco combination on brain functions, things like working memory and attention.
Yes, in that 2013 paper that we published in Addiction, we observed statistically significant differences on a task called the Ray Auditory Verbal Learning Test. And that's a fairly simple but interesting test, neuropsychological test that requires subjects to listen carefully to a list of 15 words. They're read to them, and then they're required to repeat back as many as they can remember. After subjects state back the words they can remember, the same list is again read to them, and subjects are asked again to repeat as many as they can remember, including the ones that they told the examiner the first time. The same task is repeated 3 more times, so a total of 5 trials. And then subjects are also asked to recall this same list of words following a 30-minute delay. What we observed is that all subjects recalled about the same number of words on the first try. Really no differences. But on the second try, the third trial, the fourth trial, the fifth trial, and the 30-minute recall trial, the concurrent khat and cigarette users recalled fewer words compared to both the khat-only group and the control group of non-users of khat and cigarettes. So on each of those trials, concurrent users, again, users of khat and tobacco, demonstrated a slowed rate of verbal learning. Khat use alone did not affect either the intermediate or immediate or delayed recall of previously learned words. We followed that up with a similar paper in 2014 that was published in Nicotine and Tobacco Research and reported a similar effect of the co-use of tobacco and khat on declining performance on a mental arithmetic measure of working memory.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 pieces of information.
So, of course, we cannot be certain about where these issues, deficits that you found have come from. What's the specific cause for them or the mechanisms that mediate the effects of these substances on these functions? We know that when we do observational studies, we can never be certain in terms of establishing the cause-effect relationship. Nevertheless, I think the findings point out the need to pay attention to this polysubstance use issue in this population.
We know that stimulants in general are usually associated with increased after effects. One example is amphetamines. They're usually associated with restless sleep, irritability, anxiety, mood swings, sometimes depression. It's possible that those that use khat, particularly that use excessive amounts or for excessive lengths of time, may seek other substances to calm them down afterward. This suggests a need to address clinical interventions designed to decrease tobacco and khat use and other substance use in this population, and uh, examine the risk for taking other substances, particularly given the high level of combined use in some subpopulations of khat users.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I'm also impressed with the additional data that you have published focusing on the impact of khat again on other aspects of neuropsychological and neurocognitive functions. Uh, in this case, I'm thinking of the impairments in working memory and speed information processing. Uh, Here, the research I recall involved using the forward and backward digit span test.
Yeah, in that 2013 paper that we published in European Addiction Research, we reported that chronic khat use may have a long term negative effect on working memory, particularly on digits backwards, which is a measure of short term working memory. Digit backwards is simply a task where an examiner reads a list of single digit numbers, and the subject is required to say that same list in reverse order. So that's digit backwards. It was interesting that findings from that study were consistent with results seen by several investigators using the same kind of test in samples of methamphetamine users. Uh, but we did not see a decrease in information processing speed on the digit symbol substitution test, which is another test that's been used with amphetamine users in our chronic khat user population compared to non-users. And that was somewhat unexpected because the methamphetamine and amphetamine literature suggests that users may have an enhanced performance on digit symbol substitution test, but we did not see that.
So this may likely be related to the nature of this particular stimulant that we are working with and the long-term effect of it, as well as other parameters, I'm sure. Clearly, there is still much to be learned.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount. For example, we don't know and we don't have systematic data on the acute effects of khat and how people react acutely to khat use, both cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally, particularly in a laboratory setting. We simply haven't been able to launch studies where we acutely dose individuals with khat and look at their performance.
And speaking of the acute effect, the emotional and psychological effect of khat use, there are important indicators of significant harmful effect of khat use in certain individuals. But that takes us into another topic, so we focus on that topic in another discussion, I hope. So thank you, Rick, and we hope we continue this discussion soon.
Excellent.